What is the difference between dense breasts and breast cancer? Well, it's not always so easy to tell. And a new bill that is circulating in both the Assembly and the state Senate is hoping to make insurance have to help you and pay for it as you are figuring it out. And so, one of the patient advocates for this bill and for breast cancer overall is our next guest, Ashley Inda. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. So, did I summarize what SB 121 and AB 117 is basically?
Well, what I want to go back and I want to talk about like how this bill came about because it's
Sure.
really building on Act 201, which is the breast density notification bill.
Go ahead.
So what I want to talk about is maybe go way back and first let's define dense breast. So everybody's breast composition varies, right? You have fatty tissue and you have structures associated with nursing, like milk glands and milk ducts. So glands and fibrous tissue, that's the dense tissue of your breast, okay? And so the only way to tell if you have dense breast, and 40% of Wisconsin women have dense breast, is to get a mammogram. And when you get a mammogram, the radiologist gives you a density score, and it's based on the composition of dense breast versus non dense breast. If you have dense breast tissue, it shows up as white on the mammogram. Cancer also shows up as white. So you're getting a mammogram for early detection, early screening of breast cancer. But if you have dense breast tissue, then we can't say for sure there's no cancer growing. So you get a category A, that's fatty tissue. You get a category B, that's scattered. So it's mostly fatty, some dense, but we can still see if there's cancer growing. If you get a C or a C is heterogeneously dense breast, and a D is extremely dense breast. The dense breast tissue is white, and the cancer is white. It is like finding a snowball in a snowstorm. Just just because the radiologist says, I don't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. If you have dense breast, you have a 4 to 6 times risk of developing breast cancer. 73% of all breast cancers are in women with dense breast. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Number one, we can't see the cancer because your breast tissue is so dense. And number two, you're at an increased risk for developing breast cancer. So Act 201, which Wisconsin passed in 2017, said, okay, any center that is performing mammography, you need to notify women if they fall in that category C, heterogeneously dense breast, or D, extremely dense breast, and let them know what the risk factors are of having dense breast. We can't always say with 100% certainty that there's no cancer growing. You had an increased risk of breast cancer, and you need to talk to your primary doctor, like if additional supplemental screening is necessary. And that's where this bill comes in.
Okay.
So women would get notified. Okay, you have dense breast. They go to their primary care doctor, and the doctor says, okay, I do think that we should do supplemental screening. The doctor writes the order. The insurance company denies it because it's not mandated, it's not covered. Out-of-pocket
Got it.
cost for supplemental screening is anywhere from $234 to $1,200. That's a significant barrier for a majority of women.
Yeah.
For 40%, 40% of women have dense breast, a certain percentage of them cannot afford that additional out-of-pocket cost. So Senate Bill 121, Assembly Bill 117 would no cost sharing. So insurance companies would have to cover the cost of supplemental screening and diagnostic examination in women with dense breast, and that's that BIRAD score, C or D, or those at risk for developing breast cancer. It's awesome.
It feels very straightforward. It feels like this is
Yeah.
absolutely something, because I mean, can you imagine being put in that position of just because of like your anatomy, you're like, oh, now I get to like, because you're not gonna, I would assume, not going to get the extra screening and just pay for it because you're like, oh, the alternative is that I have breast cancer and I go untreated for longer than I should. Is that basically because as the status quo is right now, it's basically putting people in that position. Like you either have to pay for the extra screening or take a gamble that maybe it's just because I have dense breasts.
That's correct. So, and that's what happened in my situation. So, at the age of 35, even before you're supposed to start screening for a mammogram, I had no family history of breast cancer.
Really?
I had no risk factors other than dense breast tissue. So, I found a lump, 35, went in. My primary said, "Yep, I see a lump." I had a mammogram and I had a breast ultrasound, and they just said, "Just dense breast tissue." And I was like, "Okay." Like and that's why we really need to educate and empower women and
Yeah.
physicians to know what the risk factors of dense breast tissue are. So 6 months later, I went back. My mass grew, it hardened. I said, "Hey, something's going on here." She did a breast exam and she's like, "You're fine. It's just dense breast tissue." And I know now that you can't palpate and tell if it's dense breast tissue or not. What she was feeling was, in fact, the tumor. The pandemic hit. I was like, "Okay, it's just dense breast tissue, just dense breast tissue." She said that in a way to alleviate my fears, but in reality should have been elevating. So when I returned in the fall of 2021, and she said, "You can opt out of a breast exam," and I said, "No, I think I still want it." She said, "Just dense breast tissue." Um, and I said, "Well, I'm not happy with that. I have 2 young kids. I'm young. I can't get hugs from my kids without it hurting. I can't lay on it. I can't work out." She's like, "I'll do it to put your mind at ease." And so that's not what happened. I ended up with stage 3 triple positive breast cancer. It had spread to my lymph nodes. And I was like, "Oh," like when I was getting the second mammogram done and they biopsied it on site, I kept saying, "Just dense breast tissue, just dense
Yeah.
breast tissue." So that's why I'm doing this right now, because it's
Absolutely. Of
not
course.
just dense. Mhm.
We're talking to Ashley Inda, who's a patient advocate on behalf of breast cancer, but also specifically having dense breasts and what that increases your likelihood of having breast cancer, but also makes it harder to actually detect it. And so, did you, for as far as the legislative part of this, is this something that you advocated for? And like, how did the bill start? Like you said, it was Act 201, and then how has it progressed since then? And have you been involved since the beginning?
So actually, a similar bill was introduced last year, but this current bill is better than that because this current bill totally eliminates any cost sharing
Okay.
in terms of the patient having to pay. Last year, it was like a $50 copay. So this is the second time that we've been kind of bringing this forward. Um, the wonderful thing about this is it has bipartisan support. Over one third of the legislators actually co-sponsored on the
Oh,
bill.
great.
Um, the Senate Health Committee has already had a hearing on this and had people testify. The next step in that is that they have to kind of meet behind closed door and see if they want to move this out of committee and then onto the floor. We're told that the Assembly is going to be meeting sometime this fall, the Assembly Health Committee, to kind of hear testimony. We have over 17 organizations that are in support of this. In the last 4 months, approximately 7 states have passed similar legislation.
Oh, wow.
So and the biggest thing is like, how much is this going to cost? How much are our insurance companies, like the premiums, how much is it going to go up? And on average, it's 84 cents a year. That's it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there's really no reason to not do this.
Yeah.
So as far as we always love bipartisan supported bills.
It's shocking.
It's shocking. Doesn't always happen, but this seems like a no-brainer. And so as far as what people should know as contacting their senators or their
Mhm.
assembly people, who, as far as it's still being in committee, is there specific names that you would want to throw out of people to reach out to and let them know your people, individuals and voters, constituents support of this bill?
I would encourage everybody to go to earlydetectionwi.com. You just plug in your information and it just sends all this, the emails, and it contacts. I'm set a timer on my phone, and I contact my representative every week to let them know. When we had our advocacy day, we were told by their staff that the more times that you call, they kind of take note of that, like, "Oh, this is really important." Um, I would say any member of the health committee on either the Senate or the Assembly side is great to start there, but just go to earlydetectionwi.com. That's if you're just kind of lost as to where to start.
And Ashley, that's really nice to know that if you are persistent, it might actually cut through that this is important to their constituents. I think that's really important.
And then finally, beyond the bill and the legislative and policy side of things, what would you recommend as resources for people who would, just as far as their own health and being aware of dense breast tissue and what that can mean? Is there any other resources, or is that also on earlydetection.com?
No, so I have a whole bunch of them. MyDensityMatters.com, AreYouDense.com, OperationBreastDensity.com. You go to those sites and you're going to get so much information. There's a calculator that you can fill out to determine what your risk factors are. You can take that with you when you go to your appointment. You can be empowered.
Great. Well, this was super informative. Thank you so much for reaching out to us and letting us know this is happening. I will put all those resources in our show notes for today. But Ashley, Inda, this is wonderful, and thank you for your advocacy on behalf of all of us, because I would say I have some dense breast tissue. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
we'll be back in just a moment. This is As Goes Wisconsin.